What if the deadliest plague in history was not spread by rats or air or blood, but by music? In 1518, in the heart of Strasbourg, dozens of people stepped into the streets and began to dance without stopping. Not for water, not for sleep, not even to save their own lives. Within weeks, hundreds were convulsing in the grip of a terrifying force. Their bones broke, their feet bled, their hearts exploded mid-step. And still, they danced. Was it mass hysteria, a divine punishment, or something far darker, an ancient force that knew how to hijack the human mind? This is the forgotten plague that made people dance until they died. A true haunting story of psychological terror, secret cults, forbidden music, and a mysterious figure known only as the Maestro. Once you hear the rhythm, it may already be too late. Watch to the end, because the final secret is more disturbing than anyone ever imagined. It began with a woman. On a sweltering morning in July of 1518, in the heart of Strasbourg, a woman named Frau Trophäa stepped into the cobbled street barefoot and began to dance. There was no music, no festival. Her limbs jerked with strange abandon, not with joy, but something far more unnerving, something that looked like agony wearing the mask of ecstasy. Neighbors watched with confusion at first, then concern. Her husband pleaded with her, gripping her wrists, but she tore away violently, her eyes blank as if under some unseen command. Hours passed. She danced through noon, through dusk. Blood soaked the soles of her feet. Her body convulsed, collapsed, and then, just as unnaturally, rose again to continue. By morning, she was still moving, and she was no longer alone. Within days, dozens more joined her. Men, women, even children began to twitch, spin, and shudder in the same grotesque trance. By the end of the first week, over 50 people were writhing in the city square. Some howling, others weeping, most unable to stop. Their bodies twisted like marionettes yanked by invisible strings, their faces frozen between fear and rapture. The city had no name for what they saw, but it would come to be known in whispers as the dancing plague. At first, city officials believed it was the result of demonic possession or divine punishment. But as more citizens collapsed, bones splintering, hearts failing, mouths foaming, prayers turned to panic. The mayor called an emergency council. Physicians were summoned from as far as Basel. They examined the victims with trembling hands, yet found no rash, no infection, no fever. Only one symptom bound them all: the compulsion to dance until death. The church, gripped by medieval superstition, declared that these were sinners consumed by their own indulgence, flesh punished by God. But the people knew better. These were mothers, fathers, honest workers, kind neighbors. Some of the most pious citizens in Strasbourg had become prisoners of their own bodies. Behind closed doors, a whisper began to spread. What if it was not a punishment, but a curse? Among the townspeople, one man watched the madness with haunted eyes. Johann Liebert, a former physician turned recluse, had buried his own wife and child 3 years prior during a brutal famine. Since then, he lived on the edge of town, surviving on tinctures and bitterness. He had seen death, yes, but not like this. He recognized the signs of physical torment, but this danced at the edge of sanity. He kept a notebook, writing down what he observed. The spasms seemed rhythmic, not random, almost like choreography only the afflicted could hear. He noticed they often moved in waves. One victim would tremble, then another would mirror the movement a moment later, as if pulled by collective muscle memory. It reminded him of soldiers in a trance, or more disturbingly, a cult in rapture. On the seventh night, he crept into the city. The square was lit with torches and moonlight. Around 30 dancers remained, skin torn, limbs trembling like reeds in wind. And then he saw her, Frau Trophäa. Her eyes met his. For a moment, they held there, not blank, not distant, but aware. She mouthed something, a single word: help. He stepped forward, but before he could reach her, her body arched backward violently, and she collapsed. Her chest heaved and then stilled. She was the first to die, but not the last. By morning, 12 more had perished, and still the dancing did not stop. The mayor, in desperation, took advice from the physicians who now believed the cause to be overheated blood, a theory born from the ancient humors of Galen. Their solution was unthinkable. Build a stage, bring musicians, let them dance it out. The city obeyed, and within hours the town square became a grotesque theater of death. Minstrels strummed while people collapsed mid-twirl, bodies piling like broken dolls around the edges of the wooden platform. The music, meant to cure, only seemed to feed the frenzy. Some who had resisted for days now joined in, as if the notes were a commandment. And from the crowd, a cloaked figure watched in silence. He smiled, because he had seen this before. Not in Strasbourg, not even in France, but in a monastery in the Black Forest, 27 years ago, where a similar madness had erupted and was swiftly buried. A madness that danced its way through monks and priests, silenced by fire and secrecy. He had sworn never to return. But now the rhythm had come again, and it was only beginning. He called himself Ulrich. At least, that was the name he used when he returned to Strasbourg. He arrived without herald or attention, wearing the same black cloak he had worn on the night the monastery burned. He passed through the city gates like smoke, slipping through crowds transfixed by terror. Children clung to their mothers, beggars crossed themselves in silence, and the air was heavy with something no one dared name, like the echo of a hymn sung backward. Ulrich walked with the ease of someone who had seen this nightmare before. The town had begun to unravel. The music cure had failed catastrophically. More than 100 people now danced uncontrollably. Men with ribs poking through skin twitched on bloodied legs. Their mouths cracked from thirst. Women screamed prayers mid-spin. Children mimicked the movements, thinking it was a game, until they could not stop. The city's leaders refused to acknowledge the horror. Archbishop Wilhelm claimed the dancers were possessed. The mayor argued it was an illness of the mind. But Johann Liebert, watching it all from the margins, had started to wonder if it was something older, something designed. When Johann met Ulrich, it was not by chance. Ulrich had been watching him, waiting for the right moment. He approached Johann in a shadowed alley near the cathedral, where bells rang hollow over screams. "You are a physician," Ulrich said. "I was," Johann answered, "until I realized knowledge means nothing to corpses." Ulrich nodded, his face unreadable. "Then you are ready." He handed Johann a leather-bound book, worn, brittle, and scorched along the spine. It was a journal, pages written in Latin, with diagrams of the human nervous system, strange symbols and disturbing sketches. Bodies locked in unnatural dances, a circle of hooded figures standing around them. Johann flipped through it with trembling fingers. "Where did you get this?" Ulrich's voice was low. "From a monastery in Baden, 27 years ago. I was a novice. I watched 21 monks dance themselves into the grave." Johann stared at him, searching for signs of madness. But Ulrich's eyes were calm and haunted. "They called it a punishment from God," Ulrich continued. "But it was not divine. It was human, engineered." "Engineered?" Johann echoed. "You are saying this is a man-made affliction?" "I am saying," Ulrich replied, "that someone found a way to hijack the human body, to break the mind through rhythm, repetition, ritual. It is not illness, it is design." The idea struck Johann like cold iron. The rhythmic movements, the shared patterns, the way music intensified the symptoms, it all aligned. He had assumed mass hysteria, but what if this was something deliberate? He turned another page and saw a name scrawled in the margin: Dr. Kuno Rothwald. A scholar, Ulrich explained, obsessed with mind control, sacred geometry, and sound. He disappeared after the monastery fire, but he left something behind, and now it has returned. That same night, a new wave of dancers took to the streets. The city, now on the edge of collapse, had barricaded the square, but the affliction had spread beyond. In alleys, in barns, and churches, people began to convulse. Merchants twitched in their stalls. Midwives collapsed mid-birth. A baker slit his wrist trying to stop his own arms from jerking. The disease, or curse, or experiment, was no longer isolated. It had become contagious. Ulrich and Johann worked in secret, studying the afflicted. They noted that not all victims heard music. Some danced in silence, as if hearing melodies no one else could. Others claimed to see shapes in the air, spinning circles, impossible geometry. One woman described a man with no face whispering the steps into her ear. More disturbing were the survivors. A handful of dancers had managed to stop after several days. But their minds were shattered. They repeated nonsense phrases, clawed at their own skin, or sat rocking, murmuring a single word over and over again. Maestro. When Ulrich heard it, his face turned pale. He said nothing, but Johann pressed him. "Who is the Maestro?" Johann asked. Ulrich hesitated. Then he answered. A name from Rothwald's notes. A title, not a man. The conductor, the summoner, the one who turns flesh into rhythm. That same night, an entire family was found dead. Father, mother, and 3 children, all lying in a perfect circle in their home. Their hands linked, smiles frozen on their faces. On the wall above them, painted in their own blood, were 4 concentric rings, a symbol Johann had seen before. In the journal. He rushed to the cathedral archives where forgotten medical records were kept in the vaults, and what he found turned his stomach to stone. This had not started in Strasbourg. There were accounts dating back to 1374 in Aachen, Cologne, Metz. Small outbreaks, always dismissed as hysteria or superstition. But the pattern was the same, and every time the afflicted drew the same symbol. The Maestro had been composing his symphony for over a century, and now it was reaching its crescendo. The nights had become louder than the days. By late July, the city of Strasbourg no longer slept. Moans echoed off stone walls. Bones cracked like firewood. The priests had stopped performing last rites. There were too many dying too quickly. The bells no longer tolled for the dead, because the sound made the dancers convulse even more violently. Johann had seen plagues before. He had watched hunger eat villages and watched fever melt skin. But this was different. This was precise, musical, almost intelligent. Inside the candle-lit corner of the cathedral library, Ulrich and Johann pored over the scorched journal of Dr. Kuno Rothwald. Each page felt heavier than the last. There were notes about sonic structures, sequences of tones that bypassed conscious resistance, phrases like limbic induction, patterned possession, and most disturbingly, the architecture of obedience. Rothwald had not merely studied music. He had sought to weaponize it. According to one passage, he had worked with a now-defunct brotherhood of monks known as Fratres Silenti, the Brothers of Silence. But their silence was not spiritual. It was self-preservation. They had discovered that sound, in precise intervals, could enter the nervous system like poison, that certain frequencies could bypass thought entirely. He had theorized that rhythm, not words, was the most ancient form of control, that the body, given the right signal, could be turned against the mind. And he had tried to prove it. Johann sat back from the manuscript, trembling. "This is not illness," he whispered. "It is performance, choreographed agony." Ulrich nodded, and every performance needs an audience. That same afternoon, Johann learned that several of the city's wealthiest citizens, guild masters, nobles, even the bishop's cousin, had not yet been afflicted. They had taken refuge on the city's outskirts. When he pressed further, he was told they had already fled Strasbourg entirely. They had known. But how? Ulrich and Johann followed the trail to an abandoned chapel outside the walls, long sealed after a fire decades prior. Its charred walls were overgrown, its pews reduced to ash. Yet inside the crypt, they found something chilling, a circle of 7 robes arranged precisely. In the center, a stone pedestal, and atop it, a cracked metronome still ticking. Behind the pedestal, a mural had survived the fire. Barely, it showed human figures bent backward in dance, mouths open in screams. Above them loomed a faceless man conducting with outstretched arms. The Maestro. Etched beneath it in Latin were the words, "Qui audit paret, qui paret perit." He who listens obeys, he who obeys perishes. Johann recoiled. What was this place? A sanctuary, Ulrich answered, or a rehearsal hall. The deeper they descended into the chapel's lower vaults, the stranger the air became. A damp cold, a faint vibration, like music felt through bone. The tunnels led to a chamber carved with spiraling patterns. No corners, no right angles, just endless curvature, like sound waves frozen in stone. And there, at the heart of it, was a coffin. Not buried, displayed. They opened it slowly. Inside was a skeleton, long, spindly, dressed in faded black. Over the sternum, nailed directly to the bone, was a sheet of parchment, a musical score, but not one either of them could read. The notes were not Latin, not Gregorian, not even human in rhythm. The time signatures were impossible, fractured, recursive. Ulrich took a step back. He was not a doctor, not entirely. He was a conductor of death. They brought the score back to their hidden study, wrapped in cloth, and as Johann began to transcribe it, he noticed something uncanny. The notes matched the convulsions of the dancers. Every twitch, every rhythm. The movements were not random. They were choreography. He no longer believed Rothwald had died in the monastery fire. He believed something else had survived. The composition itself, like a virus in melody, a parasite in rhythm, and perhaps someone still knew how to play it. That night, a fire broke out at the city's granary. It was no accident. Half the grain stores were destroyed, causing a panic that drew half the city into the streets, including those who had managed to stay safe indoors. Among the chaos, someone placed a man on a raised cart with a flute. He played only 4 notes. By morning, 80 new dancers had emerged. And then came the letter, slipped under Johann's door, written in elegant, surgical handwriting. It read, "Your research is accurate but incomplete. You are not the first to uncover the truth, and you will not be the last to be silenced. The final movement begins soon." M. The paper smelled faintly of lavender and ashes. Johann read the letter again in silence. The signature, a single M, seemed to shimmer with quiet malice. It was not just a warning, it was a promise. The final movement was about to begin, and the tempo of death was accelerating. He knew then that this was no longer a sickness. This was a performance, a carefully constructed act, and Strasbourg was the stage. The Maestro, whoever or whatever he was, had returned to conduct his magnum opus. The plague of motion, of sound, of shattered minds was not random. It was a symphony, and it was entering its final crescendo. Ulrich stood in the shadows of the study, staring at the scorched parchment pinned over the hearth. "He is watching us," he said, just as he did in Baden. Johann turned sharply. "You believe he survived?" Ulrich said nothing. Instead, he placed an item on the table, a ring. It had a sigil carved into its face, 4 concentric rings in a single vertical line, the same symbol found in blood above the family who had died smiling. "I took it from a corpse in the crowd last night," Ulrich murmured. "A man who danced until his spine snapped. It was buried under his skin." "Buried?" Johann asked. "Yes, not worn, implanted." Johann felt his breath catch. This was no simple cult. This was something organized, hidden, ancient. They needed answers, not from books, not from bones, from the living. They found her in the infirmary behind the cathedral, one of the rare few who had survived the dancing without dying. Her name was Adela, once a seamstress, now little more than a husk of a woman. She sat chained to her bed, her eyes flickering, her limbs twitching slightly even in stillness. She had not spoken since the day she stopped dancing. Johann knelt beside her, speaking gently, slowly, like coaxing a frightened child out of hiding. "Adela, I need you to remember. Who made you dance?" Her head lolled. A small smile flickered and died. "Do you remember music?" A tremor passed through her body, her eyes focused. "No," she whispered. "Not music. The silence between." Ulrich stiffened. "What do you mean?" Johann pressed. Adela's breathing grew shallow. He walks in the rests, between the notes, where no one hears." Johann leaned closer. "Who, Adela? Who is he?" She began to hum, soft, broken. a single eerie melody that wove through minor chords like something sung to dying stars. Ulrich recognized it instantly. It was the first bar of Rothwald's score, the section marked Allegro Mortis. Her eyes rolled back, her mouth opened, but no sound came. She was mouthing something again, a name, one syllable, over and over. And then she screamed. Not a cry of pain, but of warning, as if she saw something standing just behind Johann. He turned, but no one was there. When he turned back, Adela was slumped forward, a dark stain spreading down her chest. Her nose bled. Her heart had stopped. She was dead, but her lips still moved. That night, Ulrich disappeared. Johann searched every alley, every chapel, every record. Nothing. His notebook remained behind, with only one entry added. I heard it again. I cannot let it finish. Forgive me. And then the final blow. The city's musicians, those still alive, were summoned to a gathering by anonymous invitation. The meeting was held in the old opera house on the edge of Strasbourg, abandoned since the fires a decade prior. 30 of them entered. Only 4 returned. All were mad. One clawed out his own eyes, claiming he had seen the shape of music. Another would not stop tapping the rhythm of the first bar, his fingers bloodied to the bone. The third bit off his tongue. The fourth simply whispered, "The conductor is not human." Johann broke. In fury, he returned to the burned chapel and descended again into the curved stone chamber. The coffin was still there, the score gone. On the pedestal was a single object, a tuning fork. He struck it. The vibration was wrong, unnatural. He felt it in his skull, not his ears. His vision blurred. For a moment, the stone around him seemed to pulse like a throat about to sing. And then, behind him, a voice, low, gentle, almost kind. "You have heard enough!" Johann turned. A figure stood in the dark, dressed in black, no face, just the glint of light where eyes should be. The Maestro. But before Johann could scream, the figure raised a hand, and Johann's legs began to move. Not by will, by command. He could feel it rising from his heels, like a fire beneath the skin. Not heat, but urgency, the kind that rattles the heart before a leap into darkness. Johann tried to resist, to hold his muscles still, but they betrayed him. His legs stepped forward without command, his arms lifted, his spine arched. The Maestro watched in silence. He did not speak. He did not need to. The rhythm was already inside Johann, not played aloud, but felt like an infection of soundless percussion beneath the soul. In a final act of defiance, Johann clenched his jaw so hard his molars cracked. He forced himself to speak, to break the pattern. "Why, me?" The figure tilted its head, and then it began to hum. It was not a melody, but a vibration, one that twisted through Johann's inner ear and scraped at the base of his skull. It was the same rhythm he had heard from Adela, the same one Ulrich had described from Baden, a cadence older than words. The body does not obey thought, it obeys beat. Johann dropped to his knees, shaking. He screamed, not in pain, but in grief, not for himself, but for the city, because now he understood. The plague was not spreading by sound. The sound was merely the match. The people of Strasbourg, they were already soaked in oil. Centuries of fear, famine, religious punishment, superstition. The human mind had been weakened, conditioned to obey, to submit. The Maestro had not infected them. He had simply given them permission. 2 days later, the entire square danced. All of them, hundreds. The priests, the magistrates, the children, even the sick and the old. A wave of bodies moved in eerie synchronization, not with joy, but like puppets held by wire. Their mouths open, gasping not for breath, but for release. And from the cathedral tower, a melody played. A single violinist, his face wrapped in linen, his fingers bleeding, drew the bow across string with mechanical precision. No one had seen him arrive. No one knew his name. But the music did not stop. Even when he collapsed, the bow moved on its own. Even when his body stilled, the sound continued. Ulrich was alive. He had fled to the Vosges Mountains, to a monastery older than the plague itself, one that had locked itself away for nearly a century. The monks there had preserved fragments of forbidden knowledge, pieces of Rothwald's earliest theories, and even older texts, runes from the Black Forest, whisperings of a god of rhythm worshipped before Christ walked. They called it Welten, the pulse below flesh, a deity not of words, but of movement, a god that did not speak to its followers, only commanded their limbs. And Rothwald, in his obsession, had believed the Maestro to be its avatar. Ulrich read for 3 days without rest. One passage chilled him most. When the final movement begins, he shall step into flesh, and those who dance shall not remember their own names. He returned to Strasbourg by nightfall. The city was silent, too silent. No footsteps, no prayers, no screams. Only the sound of bones clicking in rhythm. He walked through streets lined with corpses, their limbs twisted mid-movement. Some had danced until their skin tore off the muscle. Others had clawed their own ears to shreds, trying to block out a music that did not exist in sound. At the heart of the city, in the cathedral square, Ulrich found Johann. He was still standing, still moving, slowly, elegantly, as if caught in a waltz only he could hear. His face was wet with tears, his eyes empty. Ulrich approached with reverence, as one approaches a holy relic, or a bomb. He reached out and touched Johann's hand, and Johann whispered something, barely audible. He lives in silence. Now. Before Ulrich could ask more, Johann's head snapped backward, and he dropped dead. His final movement, perfect, as if rehearsed. Later that year, when the snows fell over Strasbourg, the plague stopped. No more dancers emerged. No more notes were played. The city buried its dead and erased its shame. The records were sealed. Survivors were sent away or silenced. The church declared it a mass hysteria, and physicians spoke of brain fevers and spiritual delusion. But Ulrich knew better. He returned to the chapel ruins one last time. The stone chamber was empty now. The coffin gone. The tuning fork vanished. Only the faintest etching remained on the wall. 4 rings, and beneath them, in fresh soot, intermission. If you found this story haunting and unforgettable, make sure to subscribe for more true historical mysteries and forgotten horrors from the past. There are darker tales yet to come.